Good morning and welcome to a brief video on a concept that is going to be vital to your treatment with clients. And that concept is understanding informed consent, which is both a legal and an ethical term. The foundation to this idea is that individuals have rights to freedom, to be able to be free to make up their minds without undue influence or punishment, and that they have the right to autonomy, which means self-governance, and also the concept of human dignity, that we do not just force treatment onto anyone, that we treat people with dignity based on their being human beings. And it's important that you remember that maybe you explain informed consent really well in your first visit, but it's not a one-time event, and it's considered an ongoing discussion. It's a lot of information for a client to understand, or a couple or a family to understand and visit. So it's not surprising that we would need to continue to reference informed consent as time goes on. The history goes all the way back to Nazi Germany and World War II. And the Nuremberg trials, where people around the world were made aware that the Nazis took prisoners and forced them to undergo terrible disfiguring surgeries. They were infected with various diseases, and they were not treated with compassion, and certainly not with the idea of human dignity. So from these Nuremberg trials came the idea that people have a right to know what you propose to do to them, what you propose to do with them, and explain what you're considering in clear language, and then ultimately for them to have the right to decide whether they want to undergo that or not, as well as the right to stop or not deal with any treatment that you're proposing at any time. But it goes all the way back to the 1940s and World War II. There are three parts to informed consent. Number one, obviously, that you propose to provide information for which they can then base a decision. But the important thing is that you provide them information in understandable language so that they might be able to make ultimately that decision. Part two is that you have a responsibility to make sure that they have the capacity to understand what you're explaining, what you're proposing, what the fee structure is, what the length of time might be for treatment. Maybe what you call your brand of therapy and the kinds of response rates that you typically get from clients. But you also have an important duty to be realistic with them and let them know that there are risks involved in treatment. And ultimately, the third part is that you would obtain consent that does not necessarily have to be written, but in your documentation of the session, you would write that you went over the elements of the informed consent and that they agreed verbally to that. So in this business of giving them information, I already said that you need to make sure that you describe something about what the nature of your treatment is. For example, you might say that we sit and talk together. And as a result of your talking with me about your problems, I might suggest some strategies based on a particular theory that might be beneficial to you. Of course, it's important that you also explain that there are risks, because not everyone gets better, and we cannot provide a guarantee. What are some of the benefits to someone entering treatment? What are the alternatives? For example, what if they went to a church that had grief recovery instead of working with you? What about Narcotics Anonymous, for example? You also have a responsibility to give some information about you and the therapy you propose, depending on the client and what I think they might understand. I might say something like this: I frequently use, as a basis of treatment, 3 different theoretical orientations. One of them is cognitive behavioral treatment, which has to do with the way we think about things, because that can be far-reaching in its implications for how we feel and how we behave in the nature of our relationships. But I also use psychodynamic psychotherapy, which involves understanding sometimes our unconscious defense mechanisms and our motivations. I also use dialectical behavior therapy, which involves teaching very specific strategies on managing your emotions, understanding and developing choices that you can make interpersonally, as well as learning how to tolerate distress in situations that will not change. So that's the kind of thing that I might say to people about the kind of treatment that I provide. Then I would ask them, sometimes I say to them, would you mind telling me what all those words that I just expressed to you, what they mean to you? And then I have an opportunity to determine if what I said really and truly makes sense. And then the final part is obtaining their consent. I personally use a written consent, but it's only important in your notes that you write that you have completely talked to them about this and you feel that you have an understanding of what parts of therapy you've explained, what may be problematic, and what you might have to return to in the future. I hope that this helps you if you decide that you want to be able to be more competent in explaining informed consent. I hope this helps you with that.